This is a detailed look at using the label tool with zones, which is something we can now do in ArchiCAD version 25 from build 4013 onwards. Prior to that, we could only ever use zone stamps with a zone, which has its drawbacks because you can only have a single zone stamp associated to a zone, which means that you can only have a zone stamp in one layer. If you want multiple room names, for example, on the floor plan and the electrical plan, you would have to place multiple zones in different layers. The label tool solves this problem in that you can have multiple labels on any particular zone, and you can have those labels in any different layer that you want. Another advantage is we can also now label our zones in sections, which is something we could never do before. So we can now have our room names in sections as well. Here I've opened up a existing plan. It's a version 22 plan. There's a few things you need to do with existing plans to bring them up to speed. I've obviously set the template up to work with zone labels, but I'll show you what you need to do with existing plans to allow the labels to work properly. The first thing is we've opened up the file in 25. You need to swap the libraries over to version 25 libraries. The reason you need to do that is obviously so you've got the latest libraries, but also there's a new zone label in version 25 that is only available in the 25 library. We probably won't actually use that zone label. You can, it's very similar to the zone stamp itself in that it allows you to add additional information to the stamp or to the label. So we can show things like floor finishes and room areas. But we can also do that with the auto text label, which I find is a little bit easier. So I will show you the auto text label. Now, this is a existing job, as I mentioned, and I've already drawn some zones in here. We probably don't use zones a lot, or you probably haven't used zones in jobs in the past just because they're always a little bit awkward. But I've drawn some zones in here. If I turn on the graphic override to say show zones with zone colors, you'll see the zones that I've placed in here. The blue are habitable areas, the grey is non-habitable. You don't need to worry about the colours if you don't want to. I've left a couple of rooms here without zones just to show you how placing a new zone with the label automatically works. This is what we would have if you had zones in your job now, in your old jobs. You'd have a zone with a zone stamp, and as mentioned, that zone stamp is in the same layer as the zone, so it's either on or off. If you want the zone label in a different position for the floor plan and a different position for the electrical plan because your light's right in the middle of the room, you can't do that with zone stamps. You'd have to have two separate zones, one on the floor plan and one in the electrical plan with the zone stamp in different positions. We can now solve that with the label, as I mentioned. So, as I said, there's a couple of things we need to do just to bring this job up to speed. The first thing is that these zone stamps are no longer required. Now you can't just simply select a zone stamp and delete it, because if I delete that zone stamp, the whole zone will delete. What you'll find is in the model view options, if we go into the model view options, there's under the construction element options, there's a new setting here called show zone stamps. All we need to do is, for this particular model view option that we're using, the drafting one, we just need to turn that zone stamp off. And when we say OK, those zone stamps will disappear. Probably what's best to do is to go through all of these model view options and just quickly turn the zone stamps off because you'll no longer need them. You only really need to do it to the ones that you're using. So for example, the drafting and the presentation floor plans, there's probably no need to do these. It's just a good idea if you do. So once we've got those set, I'll go back to my drafting model view option. The zone stamps are off, so I'll say OK. And what you'll see is I've still got my zones, but the zone stamps have gone. So what we need to do now is we need to use the labels instead of the zone stamps. It's quite easy to do. It's just simply the label tool. There's a separate video on the JWH ArchiCAD YouTube channel that shows you all these different settings, so I won't go through all of those. But basically what we need to do is we just need to choose the layer that our zone label is going to go into. In this case, it's just the default plan and elevation text layer, which is what I want for the floor plans. So every time I see the floor plan, that layer is turned on and I'll see the room name. Setting up the size of the text and the color of the text, etc. It's exactly as you want it to appear on the plan. Now, the other thing you'll need to do is, because it's a label, we don't want the arrows turned on, so you don't want the pointer arrow. So if you see the pointer arrow is active, we actually need to turn that off. You've also got the anchor point, which is important, the center. But to save you setting all of this up, what I've done is I've gone through and actually set some favorites up for the zone stamps. So being an old job, all you need to do is come into your favorites and import, go into here, and you simply want to import from your current version 25 template, import all the favorites, deleting the favorites that are already in here, deleting them and replacing them with those from the template. That way you'll get the latest favorites for that. And again, there's another video on the J2H Archicad YouTube channel that shows you how to import favorites for any job. So it's always good to keep those up to date because it gives you the latest options for everything. I've already done that. So what I'll need to do now is just simply activate my label tool, and I can come into here and I can go into my favorites via the little button here, or I can go into my favorites down there. Either way, but what you'll find is there's now a favorite for zones. There's 3 favorites I've got here, one for the electrical plan, one for the floor plan, and one for sketch plans or presentation plans. We can now add labels to different layers using the same zone. So all I've got to do here is pick the one that I want for my floor plan, double click that, sets all the favorites. I don't have to worry about the settings here. Now all I have to do is label the zones, which I can do one by one, simply by making sure that my zone activates. And the easiest way to do that is to use the spacebar key, which is the quick select toggle. Now you can see here it's saying multiple elements, saying a slab. That's not good. I don't want the slab. I don't want to add the label to the slab. I need to tab until I find the zone, and there's the zone, and then I can click and I can add the label. And you can see wherever I click, that's exactly where the label goes, because I've told the label to place at the center location. So this connection anchor point is important for where you're placing the zone. I can actually not worry about that. I've got the center location set for my anchor point. I've got the label tool set up. I can simply go into my zone tool now and say Control A. That selects all of the zones, and then I have an option in my documentation menu that says under document extras I can label all selected elements. Now the quick key shortcut is Control Shift L, so all I have to do is select all my zones and press Control Shift L. So I've got my zone selected, Control Shift L, and you can see all my rooms have now labelled with the room name. The label will automatically go in the center of the zone, and because my anchor point was centered, it's nicely centered the text on that point. There's all my labels. Now if I select the label, you'll see all it is an auto text label, and in that auto text label you'll see all it is using an auto text command called zone name. Now you can't write anything in here, you have to edit the label itself. So you just go to the label tool, and just like any text you can click in there and we can now edit that. All this is just an auto text field for the zone showing the zone name. I can add extra information here, so I can add things like calculated areas or floor thicknesses, measured areas, lots of information that we could have done with the zone stamp as well. I'm not interested in that. I'm literally interested in just the zone name. So that's all I'm worried about, and that's all I add as my automatic text. And because it's now reading the information from the zone, it's getting that information from the zone itself. If I select the zone there, you can see it's a zone in the zone and quantities layer, and it has the name of home theatre. If I call that something else, like this might be the games room, as I change the zone stamp name, you can see the label has automatically updated as well. So this will be associated, this zone label is associated to the zone itself, and it will always read that information from the zone. Now that's assuming that we've already got the zones in place, and you can see here I've cheated a little bit. I've added a zone for things like double carports and porches. If you've got al frescoes, verandas, that sort of stuff, if you want to name them, add a zone. Of course, these zones don't have any walls as boundaries, so when you're placing those zones, you need to go into the zone tool, and you need to, instead of using the construction method that allows you to use the inner edge of walls as a boundary, you need to manually draw either a rectangle or an irregular polygon. It allows you to specify the points you want to use as the perimeter for your zone. Here I've got some zones that I deliberately haven't added to this plan. So we can see I've got a laundry. This is just text, so I'll just delete the text out, bathroom and guest room. All I need to do now is go to my zone tool. The zone tool itself is the same as it was before, so it's exactly the same. You come into here and you say, look, I want to add a zone for the laundry. Give it the correct name. It's going in the correct layer. And the only other thing you might want to worry about, but you don't have to, is whether it's a habitable or non-habitable area. So in this case, it's a non-habitable area. So I'll choose that. All I have to do is place the zone. I'm happy with the boundaries, the walls that surround this zone. So all I have to do is place the zone with the construction method for the inner edge of the wall. My zone label is already set up. If it wasn't, what I'd need to do is go into my zone label and just check that I've got the correct label, the correct type of label, the correct fonts, correct size, everything that I've got set up. Again, choosing the favorites is a quick way of setting that up. You can also do that as you place the zone itself. There's a new option in zones that says annotate with a label. If you don't have that on, all that you will get when I place the zone in here is literally a zone. Because the zone stamp is turned off, you won't see anything. But if I do that again and I place it this time with a label, this button here just allows me to choose the favorite, so I can come into here quickly and I can just scroll down to where my zones are and say I want the zone for the floor plan. Again, double click that, that's set the favorite up, which I had already set before. My label option is now turned on. I'm using the walls as my boundaries. I click in this area here to place the zone itself, and now I just choose a position where I want the label to be. Now you can see exactly what it does. It places the zone, and now it's placed the label for it. So I'll just repeat the same for the bathroom. Bathroom is there. I'm happy with the walls, so all I have to do is click in this room somewhere and then say that's where I want the center of my label. And here I've got the guest room, so I can come into here and say guest room, and of course this is now a habitable room. So again, I just have to click inside this room to place my zone and then nominate where I want the label to go. So you can see you can actually place the zones. If you don't have zones already, you can actually place them with the label at the same time that you're actually creating the zone. Otherwise it's a case of, if you've got existing zones, turning the zone stamps off and then labeling the zones by selecting them all and using the Control-Shift-L to label all elements. Now that's the floor plan. That's pretty much the same as what we had with zone stamps. So you could have left the zone stamps on, that's perfectly fine. But as I say, what this wouldn't allow you to do with zone stamps is if we now switch to the electrical floor plan. So if I switch to electrical, these zones may or may not get turned off depending on how the plan is set up. I've tweaked the layer combinations with this so that the zone layers actually stay on. And what I can do now is I can now label the zones again, because I can add as many labels as I like in different layers. So all I have to do now is again choose my label settings. In this case, I don't want that layer, I want the electrical layer. But again, I can come into here and I can use my favorites, and I can actually say I want to label the electrical plan. Choose that favorite. I've got all my zones here already, so you can see these names here are actually left over just bits of text. That's not actually a zone stamp or a label. That's actually just text, just plain text, which we can delete if we need to. I obviously didn't delete these before. So I can go through here and delete all of this text out. Wherever we've got zones, laundry, WC, walk-in pantry, kitchen, scullery. What I've got is I've turned the layer for the zones itself, I've turned that on in the electrical layer combination, so I can see the same zones, and all I have to do is make sure that my zone label tool is set up properly, as I've done with the favourite. Go to my zone tool now, Control A to select all the zones again, Control Shift L to label all the zones. And you can see here, all I have to do now is to move these zone names for my electrical plan, so I can move them around, and now I can swap between the floor plan with the names in the centre of the zones, and I can go back to my electrical plan and I've used the same zone but different labels in different layers. Now these zone labels, they have an option here to hide with associated elements. Normally with a label that's what you would do, and you would have this option turned on. In this case I don't want to hide the labels with the zones because I actually don't want to see these zones. Now there's two ways of doing this. In the floor plan it's simply we've got a graphic override, and I can say show my drafting plan with zone colors, or I can turn the zone colors off. That's just a graphic override to say make the backgrounds of the zones transparent. I could just as easily, with that option to say don't associate labels with the elements, I could simply just turn the zone layer off. Not so important in the floor plans because we have the graphic override that we've always used and we can still keep using. But what this allows us to do is in the section, so if I go back here to my floor plan, I've got a section running through the back of the house. If I open that section up with the current settings, which means it's opened up as basically a floor plan layer combination, that's fine. What I can do now is I can actually show the zones and label them in here as well. Now that's another thing that we need to do with old jobs. Again, I've set the template up so that it works like this off the cuff, so it'll be correct as you open it. But with existing plans, there's an option in the project preferences called legacy, and if you go into the legacy, what you'll find is there's an option in here that says hide zones and their associated labels in section type views. That's on by default. What we need to do is turn that off, and if I turn that off it'll remember that for this job. And if I say OK, what will happen is, because I've got my floor plan layers turned on, I'm now seeing the zones, because in my floor plan layers the zones are turned on. Mentioning the layers, it's important, another thing that we need to do with existing plans, all the zones will live in a layer called zones quantities. So what we need to do is make sure that we can see that layer on the floor plan is on. On the elevations it's off, in sections it's off. Internal plans, you can turn it on if you want to label the zone name in the internal floor plans. Generally speaking, you'll probably leave it turned off. If you want to use the label on the electrical plans, then it's important that we go to the electrical plans and turn the zone label quantities on for all of the electrical plans as well. The same applies for the presentation plan. So we want it on for the presentation plan, we want it off for the elevations and sections. We don't have an electrical plan for presentation. So basically it's all of the floor plans need to be turned on for the zone quantities layer, and all of the sections and elevations that we use either in working drawings or presentation plans, we need to make sure that this layer is turned off. What I'm looking at, as I mentioned before, is the elevation layers, but I'm actually using the floor plan layer combination, and that's just purely so I can turn the zone layers on and off. So if I look at it with its correct layer combination, which is the sections layer combination, you can see the zones have turned off. Remember that the zone labels do not have to hide with the associated elements. That option is turned off. So all I need to do is simply turn the floor plan layers on so I can see the zones. Once I can see the zones, I can simply go to the zone tool, Control A to select them. And now all I have to do is label. Because I've got the label set up already from before, then all I have to do is to label the zones. So I have to just go Control Shift L, but because the last thing that I labelled was the electrical plan, the electrical text layer is turned off in here, so I don't want that obviously for my sections, so I need to choose my layer. If I'd have chosen the favourite again, it would have chosen the correct layer for me. I just want the default plan and elevation text layer. I say OK, and the zones will label. And just like on the floor plan, they will label in the centre of the zone. You can see here the ensuite is a little bit offset. That's because the ensuite zone actually wraps around on the floor plan behind the WC. So the zone for the ensuite is actually bigger than it appears. So that's all there is to it for labelling the zones in section. And of course, I don't really want this layer combination. I really want the sections layer combination. The zones get turned off, but because the label is not going to hide with the zone itself, the label will remain and the zones disappear. And that now allows us to label the zones in sections and elevation, which is a bit of a time saver. Of course, you can still do it the old way with just text. There's nothing stopping you doing that, but the text obviously is not associated to anything. So if you rename a room or reposition a room or delete a room, then the text will not update, the label will. So if you delete a room and you delete the zone, this label will automatically disappear as well.